My boss told me to take everything that was mine when he fired me, so I did, and it ruined everything for me. Stay with me till the end, because what happened next is something I'll never forget, and maybe it will make you think twice about who you trust at work. I'm Harper Lane. For 8 long years, I gave my time, energy, and even my weekends to a mid-sized distribution company in Indianapolis. I started fresh out of college, just a small-town Indiana girl with big dreams. My parents raised me to believe that hard work always pays off. And for a long time, I thought it was paying off. I moved up from an assistant role to operations coordinator, running projects that brought in millions for the company. The problem was my boss, Grant Whitaker. On the surface, he was smooth, always smiling for upper management, shaking hands, telling jokes. But when it came to credit for the work, that's where his charm stopped. Time after time, I'd pour weeks into proposals, only for him to present them as his own. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. As long as the team succeeded, I succeeded too, right? But deep down, it burned. Especially when Grant started showing more attention to Madison Cole, the new hire who seemed to get by on little more than flattery and quick smiles. She had no idea how the systems worked, yet Grant kept inviting her into client meetings that I used to lead. It got worse when I caught him taking a call with one of my biggest clients, a call scheduled under my name, and using my strategy word for word. Madison sat beside him, nodding like she understood every detail, while I was left in the hallway, listening through the glass. I swallowed my pride for months, thinking if I kept working hard, things would get better. But they didn't. The final straw came when I spent months building a proposal for a major account, something that could have doubled our annual revenue. The day before the pitch, I opened the file and saw my name had been removed. Madison's was there instead. I sat in that meeting and watched her stumble through numbers she didn't understand. And when the client's face turned confused, Grant looked straight at me and said, "Harper, you should have prepared your teammate better." The humiliation was like a punch to the gut. That night, I knew something inside me had changed. I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. I just didn't know that my breaking point would come so soon, or that Grant himself would give me the perfect opening to take back everything that was mine and leave him with nothing. It started small, the kind of thing you almost convince yourself you're imagining. I'd walk past Grant's office and hear him on the phone with one of my clients. At first, I assumed he was just helping out, but then I'd catch bits of my own words coming out of his mouth. Phrases I'd written in proposals, solutions I'd carefully designed, all delivered as if he'd thought of them himself. The first time, I let it slide. The second time, I started to feel uneasy. By the third time, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Grant wasn't just helping with my accounts, he was taking them over. That's about when Madison Cole entered the picture. She was the new hire, fresh from some trendy marketing firm, with a resume that sounded impressive, but no actual results to show. Still, she had one skill Grant seemed to value above all else. She laughed at every single joke he made, even the ones that weren't funny. And she made sure everyone in the office knew how brilliant Grant was, whether he deserved it or not. Almost overnight, she became his shadow. Need a big presentation? Madison was helping. Hosting a high-profile client? Madison was shadowing. And somehow, the meetings I used to run were now team meetings, except I wasn't part of the team anymore. One morning, I walked into the conference room to find Madison setting up for a meeting with a client I had personally brought into the company years ago. She smiled like she'd been caught doing nothing wrong and said, "Oh, Grant told me to take this one. You've got enough on your plate." Enough on my plate? That account was my work, my relationship, my trust built over years. And now it was being handed off like a spare folder. That's when I started keeping records. Every idea, every file, every strategy one came up with, I made a copy and saved it somewhere private. Every conversation with a client, I logged the date, time, and details. If they were going to edge me out, I was at least going to have proof of what I'd done. The thing is, once you start paying attention, you see the pattern everywhere. Grant would forget to invite me to calls, then later talk about his breakthrough solution. Madison would sit in on my meetings, quietly jotting down my points, then repeat them to Grant as if she'd just thought of them. It wasn't just frustrating, it was insulting. I'd spent 8 years building my credibility, and now it felt like I was being erased from my own work. But I kept my head down and kept my files close. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just some office politics I could ignore. This was the start of something much bigger and much uglier. I had been working on that proposal for months. It wasn't just another project. It was the kind of account that could change the trajectory of a career. If we landed it, it would double the company's annual revenue and open doors to even bigger opportunities. I poured myself into it. Late nights, skipped weekends, endless revisions to get every single detail perfect. This was supposed to be my moment. The day before the presentation, I stopped by the shared drive to run through the file one last time. That's when I saw it. My name gone, completely erased from the cover page and every single slide. In its place was Madison's. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. My stomach twisted as I clicked through the slides. The content was the same, my work untouched, except for the fact that my name had been scrubbed from it as if I had nothing to do with it. I stormed down the hall to Grant's office, but he wasn't there. Madison was, though, sitting at her desk, calmly rehearsing her lines like she'd been preparing for this moment all along. She didn't even look guilty, just smiled and said, "Don't worry, Harper. I'll give you a shout-out in the meeting." The next morning, I sat in the conference room while Madison stood at the front, clutching my work in her hands. She stumbled through the opening, mispronouncing the client's name. By the third slide, she was mixing up figures and skipping over critical data points I had spent weeks perfecting. The client's expressions shifted from interest to confusion. I tried to step in, gently adding clarifications, but Grant cut me off with a tight smile. "Let's let Madison finish," he said. His voice carried that warning tone, the one that told me to back down or make things worse for myself. By the end, the client looked unconvinced. And instead of acknowledging Madison's mistakes, Grant turned to me in front of everyone and said, "Harper, you really should have prepared your teammate better. This isn't the level we aim for." I felt my cheeks burn. It was like the air had been punched out of me. Months of work, my work, had just been used to humiliate me. After the meeting, I marched straight into his office. My voice shook, not from fear but from fury. "You took my name off my project. You let her present it without understanding a word of it, and then you blamed me." Grant leaned back in his chair, totally unfazed. "You're being territorial, Harper. This is a team environment. If you can't share credit, maybe you're not a good fit here." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to stop. As long as I stayed, Grant would keep taking from me, and I wasn't sure how much more I was willing to lose before I finally broke. A week after that disastrous meeting, I got the email, short, cold, and direct. "Please come to my office at 10 a.m. to discuss your position." I already knew what was coming. Still, a small part of me hoped I was wrong. I walked into Grant's office, and he was sitting there with that fake sympathetic smile he used whenever he was about to say something awful and pretend it was just business. "Harper," he began, folding his hands like a politician, "this isn't easy for me, but after reviewing the company's needs, we've decided to eliminate your role. It's nothing personal, just restructuring." I blinked. "Restructuring? Grant, I am the operations coordinator. You can't just—" "It's already decided," he interrupted, his voice dripping with finality. "You'll need to pack up today. No need to come back after this. We'll have someone collect your badge by the end of the day." I waited for him to mention severance, a reference letter, something, but all I got was silence. "No severance?" I asked finally. He shrugged. "Not in this case." It felt like a punch to the gut. 8 years of loyalty. Late nights. Weekends. All the times I'd stepped in to save his project. And this was how it ended. I stood up, numb, ready to leave without giving him the satisfaction of seeing me break. But just as I reached the door, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Take everything that's yours, Harper," he said casually. "You've earned it." It should have sounded like a parting gesture, but the way he said it felt like a dare, like he thought I had nothing worth taking. I didn't respond. I just walked out, my mind spinning. In the hallway, people glanced up from their desks, pretending not to notice what was happening. I kept my head high as I went to my office. When I closed the door behind me, I sat there for a moment, staring at the desk where I'd spent most of my adult life. My calendar was full of projects I'd started. My computer held years' worth of templates, systems, and client lists. Many of them from my freelance work before the company even hired me, work I had legally retained ownership of. And suddenly, Grant's smug words started echoing in my mind. "Take everything that's yours." He thought he was mocking me, but what he didn't realize was that I actually had something worth taking. A lot, in fact. I began packing my personal items, but with every book, every photo frame, every pen I placed in the box, my plan grew clearer. I wasn't just going to take my things. I was going to take my work, my clients, and the foundation he'd been standing on for years. If Grant wanted me gone, fine, but I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I sat in my office with the door shut, the box for my things open on the desk. My hands were moving, packing mugs, photos, and pens, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. 8 years. That's how long I'd been here. And in those 8 years, I'd done more than just show up for a paycheck. I'd built things, real things. I thought about the client base I had personally cultivated from the ground up. Many of those clients hadn't even known the company before I walked into their offices. I was the one who shook their hands, learned their business inside and out, and made sure our service became something they couldn't live without. They trusted me, not the company name on the letterhead. Then there were the systems, the project tracking templates, the automated scheduling process, the custom reporting form. None of those existed before I started. I developed them to make my job easier, but they ended up becoming the backbone of the company's operations. Without them, I knew the place would fall into chaos. And the kicker? Some of those tools and client relationships were technically mine. Years ago, before I was a full-time employee, I'd done freelance work for the company. We had signed agreements back then that clearly stated any intellectual property I created during freelance projects remained mine. It was a clause Grant never bothered to change when I joined full-time, probably because he never thought it mattered. But now? Oh, it mattered. A lot. Grant's smug face flashed in my mind, his voice dripping with arrogance. Take everything that's yours, Harper. You've earned it. At first, I had taken it as an insult, a final jab to make me feel small. But the more I replayed it, the more it started to sound like permission. He thought I was walking out with nothing but a couple of office supplies. What he didn't realize was that I was sitting on intellectual property, years of processes, and client loyalty that could bring his operation to its knees. I closed my eyes and thought about the people I'd worked with over the years, the ones who emailed me directly, bypassing the generic company contact. The clients who called my personal phone for advice, even late at night. If I reached out to them, I knew exactly how many would follow me. And the truth was, I didn't even need all of them. Just a few major accounts, and Grant's carefully balanced numbers would collapse. In that moment, the shock of losing my job faded. The humiliation began to burn away, replaced by something sharper. Determination. Grant wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't going quietly. I was going to take what was mine. Every client, every file, every system I had the rights to. And when I walked out that door, I wasn't just leaving with my box of things. I was leaving with the very foundation his success had been built on. I didn't waste time. The moment I got home that evening, I opened my laptop, pulled up my personal contact list, and started typing. The first email went to a client I'd worked with for 6 years, someone who knew me well enough to notice I hadn't been on our last few calls. I kept it professional. I explained that I had left the company, that I was now offering my services independently, and that I'd be happy to continue supporting their business directly. I didn't badmouth Grant or the company. I didn't have to. The truth would speak for itself. The reply came within an hour. We've been unhappy with how things have been handled since you stepped back. As soon as we're able, we'll move our contract to you. That was all the encouragement I needed. I spent the next 2 days reaching out to every client I had a personal relationship with, the ones who had my cell number, the ones I'd met for coffee when they were in town, the ones who'd trusted me with more than just their business. The responses poured in. Outrage, disappointment, support. Some said they'd suspected something was wrong when Grant started sending Madison in my place. Others didn't bother hiding their anger. They told me outright that they only stayed with the company because of me, and now that I was gone, they saw no reason to remain. While those conversations were happening, I got to work on the other part of my plan. I started gathering everything I had the legal right to take. Old project templates? Mine. Custom scheduling systems I built during my freelance days? Mine. Specialized reports I had created under the original agreement? Mine. Because Grant had never updated my contract when I went from freelance to full-time, all those protections were still in place. The loopholes were right there in black and white, and he had signed off on them years ago without a second thought. I wasn't stealing a thing. I wasn't breaking any laws. I was simply taking the work that was mine, the same work he had relied on to run his company. By the end of the week, my home office was stacked with labeled folders, flash drives, and printed client lists. Every bit of it organized and ready. I even double-checked with a lawyer friend to make sure I was in the clear. His words made me smile. You're not just in the clear, you're holding all the cards. I could already see how this would play out. Once the legal transfer windows were up, the clients would follow. Grant's project boards would go empty, and his golden girl Madison wouldn't have a clue how to rebuild them. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just payback. This was survival. I'd given that company 8 years of my life. Now it was time to build something that was truly mine. And if Grant's empire crumbled in the process, well, that was just a bonus. The next morning, I walked back into the office with my head high and a calm smile that must have looked out of place to anyone watching. People assumed I was there to collect the last of my things, and in a way, they were right. But this time, I wasn't just packing family photos and a coffee mug. I had a checklist, a very specific one. Every file, folder, and flash drive that contained my proprietary work went into my box. My custom templates, the project tracking spreadsheets, the automation scripts, all mine by contract. Years of intellectual property that Grant had leaned on without a second thought. I moved methodically, almost leisurely, taking my time to double-check everything. If someone passed by and peeked in, I just smiled politely, as if I was doing nothing more than cleaning up. By the time I left, my box was heavier than it had ever been, but my heart felt lighter. I knew exactly what I was taking, the core of what kept Grant's operation running smoothly. The real impact became clear the very next day. My phone buzzed with messages from a former colleague. What's going on? The project boards are a mess. No one knows where anything is. Grant's carefully curated empire was showing cracks overnight. Without my systems in place, deadlines were slipping. Files couldn't be found. Clients were calling and confused, wondering why their projects were suddenly behind schedule. And then came the best part. The first official client transfer happened just 3 days after I left. They cited changes in leadership and communication as their reason for ending their contract, but I knew the truth. They'd already signed with my new consultancy. Within 2 weeks, the ripple effect turned into a wave. 4 of the company's largest clients, accounts that made up a huge portion of their annual revenue, had canceled their contracts and joined me. They didn't just follow me out of loyalty. They followed me because I'd proven over years that I could deliver better results without the corporate nonsense slowing us down. From my small home office, I set up shop. A simple website, a direct phone line, and a promise to keep things personal and efficient. My inbox filled faster than I could keep up, and I started bringing in trusted former colleagues to help with the workload. Meanwhile, word trickled back to me about the chaos at Grant's firm. Internal emails were flying, blame was being passed around, and Madison was drowning without the systems I'd built. The image Grant had worked so hard to maintain, the confident, in-control leader, was cracking in front of his clients and his staff. I didn't have to lift a finger to ruin him. All I did was take what was mine. The rest? That was just the natural collapse of a structure that had been propped up by my work for far too long. And watching it from the outside was more satisfying than I ever imagined. At first, Grant tried to keep his tone friendly, fake friendly, of course. 3 days after the first client officially left his firm for mine, he called me. "Harper," he said smoothly, "I think you might have accidentally taken some materials that belong to the company. If you could just return them, no hard feeling." I almost laughed. "Grant, every single file I took is documented as mine. I have contracts, emails, and receipts proving it. You signed them yourself." He paused, clearly not expecting me to have an immediate answer. "Well, maybe we can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," I said calmly. "I took what was mine, just like you told me to." And then I hung up. A week later, his tone changed. The polite requests became sharp emails. Then came the threats. "Our legal team will be in touch. You've put yourself in serious jeopardy." I replied once, attaching scanned copies of the dated contracts and the original freelance agreement, the one that spelled out, in plain English, that my intellectual property remained mine. My lawyer friend had even highlighted the sections for emphasis. After that, the threat stopped. He must have realized he had no legal ground to stand on. But by then, the damage to his reputation had already begun. Word travels fast in our industry, especially when clients feel burned. One of my new clients casually mentioned that another company had heard about the Grant situation and decided to move their account elsewhere. I didn't have to do any PR work. The truth was spreading all on its own. Inside his office, things were falling apart even faster. I got the occasional update from an old colleague who had stayed behind, at least for the time being. Madison was drowning. Without my systems, she couldn't keep deadlines straight. She was sending half-finished reports to clients, missing key data, and making promises the team couldn't fulfill. Grant, instead of protecting her like he always had, started throwing her under the bus to save face. In meetings, he'd hint that she wasn't living up to expectations. To the staff, it was obvious he was panicking. The breaking point came about a month after I left. Madison handed in her resignation, quietly but decisively. She'd realized that without me, and without my clients, Grant couldn't shield her. She was just another employee now, stuck in a sinking ship. The day I heard she'd left, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. She'd played a part in edging me out, but in the end, she'd been used just like I had. As for Grant, the calls and emails from him stopped entirely. Not because he'd forgiven me, but because he was too busy trying to plug the holes in a ship that had been taking on water since the day I walked out with my boss. And from where I stood, it was only a matter of time before it went under completely. 6 months later, the inevitable finally happened. Grant's company shut its doors for good. The news didn't surprise me. For months, I'd been hearing little updates from people still in the industry. Clients were pulling out one by one, deadlines were being missed left and right, and the few remaining employees were stretched so thin they could barely keep up with basic tasks. Payroll delays became common. Rumors swirled about unpaid vendor bills. Eventually, a big account, one of their last, decided they couldn't risk sticking around. That was the final blow. Without that revenue, the firm simply couldn't keep the lights on. Former employees, now free from any obligation to keep quiet, began talking openly about what had been going on for years. Stories of blatant favoritism, backroom deals, and Grant taking credit for other people's work spread quickly. People who had once been too scared to speak up now seemed eager to share their experiences, almost as if they'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't go out of my way to add fuel to the fire. I didn't have to. The truth was doing the work for me. Meanwhile, my own life looked completely different. My consultancy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The 4 big clients who had come over at the start were still with me, and I'd added several more. I had a streamlined team, low overhead, and complete control over the quality of the work we delivered. I even reached out to 2 of my old colleagues who had been treated poorly under Grant's leadership. Both had left the company after I did, and both had been struggling to find a workplace that respected. Bringing them on board felt like closing a loop. Not only were they talented and trustworthy, but they also understood the value of building something without office politics getting in the way. The 3 of us worked well together. Deadlines were met, clients were happy, and there was no need for the kind of ego games that had poisoned Grant's office. We celebrated wins together, and for the first time in years, I woke up excited to start my day. And then one afternoon, I got a text from a friend. Guess who's working at Westfield Logistics now? I didn't even have to guess. Grant had landed a job at a much smaller firm, a far cry from the one he used to run. The kicker? His new boss had a reputation for being hard-nosed and unforgiving, with zero tolerance for excuses. The word around the industry was that Grant was struggling to adjust. I couldn't help but smile when I heard that. There was a certain poetic justice in watching him go from smug king of the castle to an employee whose every move was under someone else's thumb. He had told me to take everything that was mine, and I had. The difference was I knew how to use it. He didn't. I never once lost sleep over what I did. Every file, every client, every system I walked away with was mine. I had built them from nothing, often working late into the night while Grant was already at home, taking credit for my work in the morning meeting. He had told me to take what was mine, and I had simply taken him at his word. Looking back now, I realize how dangerously close I came to losing everything because of misplaced loyalty. For years, I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet, and kept the company's best interests at heart, I'd be rewarded. I thought Grant saw my dedication. I thought he valued it, but all he really saw was an opportunity to use me as long as it suited him. I'd ignored the warning sign, the stolen credit for projects, the way he let Madison slide into my meetings, the way my name was slowly erased from the work I had poured myself into. I told myself it was just part of the job. I told myself things would get better if I stayed the course. I was wrong. When Grant fired me, it felt like a betrayal, but it was also the push I didn't know I needed. If he hadn't shoved me out, I might still be sitting in that same gray-walled office, burning myself out for someone who never intended to let me succeed. Now, I answer to no one but myself and my clients. I choose the projects I take on. I set my own schedule, and I know that every hour I work is building something for me, not for someone else's ego. Sometimes I think about those last words he said to me, that smirk on his face, the condescension in his voice. Take everything that's yours, Harper. You've earned it. He meant it as a jab, a way to make me feel small. But all it did was light the fuse. He didn't know about the agreements I'd kept. He didn't know how many clients were loyal to me personally, not to the company name on the door. He didn't realize that the very systems his firm depended on had my name at the foundation. It's ironic. If Grant had treated me fairly, if he had given credit where it was due, I would have stayed. I would have kept building his company, kept working late nights, kept ignoring my own dreams. Instead, he handed me the perfect excuse to walk away, and to take the best parts of his business with me. I don't need revenge to feel satisfied. Success is enough, and mine is growing every single day. When he told me to take everything that was mine, I don't think he realized I'd take his crown jewel clients and his career. So here's my question for you. Do you think Harper was justified in taking what was hers and letting Grant's company fall, or should she have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear your take. And if you like true life stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.